Hey there! So today we're going to be doing a flood coat epoxy over our pirate ship parts. Probably camera probably isn't showing it, but these are pirate ship cutouts from birch plywood, and they're resting up on top of wood. And the reason they're resting up on top of wood is because we want to get it off the surface, so when the epoxy is poured onto it, it'll have a chance to flood over the top and drop down the edge. You can probably see the red. This is also part of the ship. So here are some sails, some cannon portholes, and so forth. So I've base painted the this piece red, and I plan to do a Red Hot's glitter flood coat over the top of this. And all the black pieces are getting, this one here and this one here are getting city lights. And then the sails are going to be getting an iridescent, I believe it's Sirius shimmer, that'll be going over this one. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get everything prepped up, get the epoxy mixing. This particular one, I'm using Envirotex Light. I have no loyalty to this brand. It's just one that's easy to find in hardware stores, so that's why I've chosen to use it, so that you'll probably have a good chance of finding it at yours. I like the quality, it's okay. It's nice and thick, but it tends to not run as well, so you do have to sometimes take a brush and sort of encourage it to sort of flood over the edges. Some of these brands, they just do this beautiful spread on their own and they just drop. This particular one doesn't, so it requires a little help from a friend, a paintbrush. Okay, so I'm getting my gloves on here, got a protective shirt on, and I have plastic, thick plastic on the table, and I've created a bit of a dam here so that when the epoxy hits, it won't just flood off the plastic and onto the floor. It'll be stopped by these dam areas. That's a really good point. There's nothing worse than coming back the next day and you think everything's going to be groovy, and it's come off the table and onto the floor. Been there and done that. So create little dams. This stuff should be at room temperature. Makes it work much better. I'm going to do the red first. It's really important to get equal amounts. The way I like to do it is make marks on the bottles. But you can also do measuring cups, so either way. In this case, I don't have to make marks, because they have identical warning labels at the top, so I can use their own writing. Okay, so I will be taking it to the top of the first line. Definitely want to get equal amounts. If you don't, it will dry weird, or really not dry at all. When I'm done mixing this, I'm going to be pouring it into this cup. It recommends transferring your materials from one cup to the other. Also using straight-sided cups with flat bottoms. I'm using a popsicle stick to stir it. Looks pretty good. They recommend a 3-minute stir, so I'll come back in just a little bit. Okay, great. So I've just transferred the epoxy into my new cup, and I added Red Hot's glitter to it, and it is beautiful and sparkly. The amount of glitter you add is a personal choice. There's no real rule to it. I wanted it to be extremely sparkly, so I added, I'd say at least a tablespoon to this cup, which is a lot of glitter. Okay, so here we go, ready to pour. As you can see, it's not really moving, which is exactly what I thought would happen. So that's why we have our handy dandy brush to encourage it to do what it should be doing, which is flowing. Just because the room is 70 degrees, which is what it should be, doesn't mean your piece will be 70 degrees. So we actually took the precaution of leaving the heater on in this particular room last night at over 70 degrees so that the material, meaning these boats and this epoxy, would be 70 degrees for many, many hours. That way it had time to really acclimate to the room and the temperature that we wanted. If you bring a piece in, let's say a metal piece or something, and just because the room's 70 degrees doesn't mean that piece is 70 degrees. So that's something to keep in mind. It's also very handy to keep a thermometer in your art studio or your workspace so that you can keep track of that temperature. If you're doing large large spaces, and a paintbrush is just not cutting it because it's curing too fast, you can use a squeegee. And we have glitter universities showing epoxy using squeegees very specifically as part of the Doghouse series. And you can see using a squeegee in action. It's not very practical for small things like this, but for large surfaces it is extremely handy, and it's a way to move epoxy very quickly. When I'm done with this, I will bring you in for a close-up so that you can see what the effect is. I highly recommend base painting. In this case, I used just a regular acrylic paint, nothing special. And if you see me going around the edges, it's because I want to make sure that there is epoxy on every edge. Nothing like having a beautiful epoxy piece and then having your edges be non. Okay, I'm going to let this sit for just a minute, and then I'm going to get my heat tool out. You can also do this with a blow dryer, and if you're really on a budget, you can actually get away with blowing on it with your mouth. I personally don't find that to be super effective. Okay, this is a heat tool. It gets pretty hot, so you don't want to get too close. There's also rubber stamp embossing tools. Those are very, very handy. They have a more pointed tip so you can really get very precise. And like I said, hair dryers, they're okay. They move a lot of air, but the more pro you go, the better the result. But you know, we do what we can with what we got, right? Here we go. Okay, what I find with this is that you have to come back and do it a second time. Okay, so if you do it the first time, that's great, but very often you'll have to come back and do it a second time. So keep that in mind. Okay, so all the pieces have been done. Here's the red one. See, it's so bright and shiny. See if the camera can get a close-up. Sometimes it will with the red, and sometimes it just goes crazy. Here is the Canon ports. See, the camera's trying to focus. It's hilarious. It's so bright. And here's the actual boat. Okay. And last but certainly not least, the sails. So these are still wet, completely wet. So I'm going to go take a little break, come back in about 15 minutes, see if there's any new bubbles. If there are, I'll pop them. And then at that point, seal up the room, make sure that it stays at least 70 degrees and that there's no dust. Because if dust settles on it, it's a total bummer to have to polish it out. But there is a video on how to do that in Glitter University if you ever do need to do that.